All right, now in the Peter Van Brigham Hospital in Boston. I've been here for about 9 days. I live in New York City and attend Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. That's where I've gone for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I lived in Boston for 7 years and came to Peter Van Brigham. During that time, I had a series of surgeries, and now I'm having some complications, and I came to Boston to have a workup. But while I was here, I also went into a crisis and had to be admitted to deal with the sickle cell crisis, to deal with the pain and an infection that I had.
Okay. What was your first experience with the disease?
Well, I was officially diagnosed at 21 months. Well, I'll take that back. My first crisis, I was 21 months old. I was officially diagnosed about 6 or 7 months later. One morning, my parents woke to find me crying in my crib, and my hands and feet had swollen. We now know that it's called hand and foot syndrome. My skin was jaundiced, my eyes were jaundiced. They didn't have the slightest idea what was the matter with me. They began taking me to see different doctors, and many of them didn't know. Some thought it might be a form of scarlet fever, some thought it might be rheumatic fever, a couple even thought maybe it was polio. But after a while, they were steered to the Rockefeller Institute in New York, and there encountered a German doctor who first had me given a sickle cell blood test, and he had diagnosed it as a sickle cell crisis, and that I had sickle cell disease. Of course, my parents' reaction was, sickle cell what? I mean, they had never heard of the disease, and most people at that time, including the medical world, did not know what sickle cell anemia was. At that point, I started going to New York Hospital. That's New York and Canal in New York City, where I went most of my life until I was 18. I guess it's very hard for me to say my earliest memories of the disease. I have no memory ever of being well. As far as I remember, I've always had this sickness. In my family, there were 5 children, and 3 of us were born with the disease. Out of the 3 who had the disease, I'm the only one still alive. I lost a brother when he was 5, and I was 7 at the time. And 10 years ago, I lost a sister who was 19 years old. The 2 youngest, Deirdre and Malik, Zahara and Malik, one is 21 and the other one is 18, and both of them are fine at this stage. Sickle cell disease, is a disease that affects the red corpuscles. A person with sickle cell trait, which is what my parents had, don't suffer from the disease. They just are carriers of it and can pass it on. When 2 people with sickle cell trait have a child, there's a 1 in 4 chance that the child can be born either with the disease, which is called SS, or with the trait, which is SA, or normal, which is an AA combination. In my family, the first 3 were all born with SS, sickle cell gene trait. Many people, when they hear that ratio of 1 in 4, believe that it means that if you have 4 children, only 1 will have the disease and the other 3 will be normal. But what it really means is that each time is a 1 in 4 chance of a child being born with the disease. So in the case of my family, the first 3 all came with the disease, and the last 2 came with the trait. So though they carry the disease, they'll never have symptoms from it. Only under extreme circumstances can a person with the trait have a sickle cell crisis. In fact, the United States government really became aware of this disease during World War II. They would take many black GIs up in unpressurized airplanes, and these guys would begin to go into these crises and start having all these symptoms. And through that, they began to get an awareness of sickle cell anemia. But anything that has to deal with a lack of oxygen, can cause a lack of oxygen, can cause a sickle cell crisis. You'll hear people say, when did you first get sickle cell? Or how did you catch sickle cell? Not realizing that it's a genetic disease, which is a hereditary disease, and it's passed on from parent to child. Again, the thing with the trait, any activity that causes a lack of oxygen, like going up an unpressurized plane or mountain climbing or deep sea diving, can cause a crisis. I have a friend who's SC, which is a milder form of the disease, who's only had 2 crises in his life, and one he had while visiting Mexico City. And Mexico City is very, very high in terms of altitude, so it can be a problem. But other than these things, a person with the trait can live a normal life. One of the problems, though, that arose out of this whole question of the trait, especially during the 60s, here black people were beginning to get more information about the disease, and were trying to make more demands about treatment and information being passed on to people, and setting up testing centers. And many people became afraid of what they later called the sickle cell backlash, because in things like the armed forces, they were beginning to discriminate against people with sickle cell trait. So you hit this schism in the movement of one on the one hand wanting to publicize the disease, and people on the other hand wanting to negate it because of the other problems that have arisen because of it. So a lot of times a person with the trait, because of lack of information and ignorance, are told all manner of things, that they believe. But the fact is, though, that it's very unusual for somebody with the trait to have a sickle cell crisis. In my family, I had my first crisis when I was 21 months old. My brother had his first crisis when he was 19 months old. And my sister, Alkamal, was 16 months old. So each time, it took less time before the disease to appear. Some people go considerably longer. Some people are born with more what they call fetal hemoglobin. And this is a hemoglobin that you inherit from your mother. And some people's bodies are able to retain it. And those who can retain it have less problems with the disease. For those who can't, then their own system takes over, and they have much more problems. With my brother, sister, and I, we both lost our fetal hemoglobin pretty soon, relatively soon. When I was 18, I had gotten out of high school. I wasn't really too sure what I wanted to do in terms of a profession or education, if I wanted to go into college. And I got this idea of trying to get into the armed forces. And when I was 18, I enlisted in the Navy and was able to get through their medical examination board, because of all the things that they look for. Sickle cell is not one of them, at least not at that time. Now they do look for sickle cell disease. So I was accepted and went to boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois. And in the dead of winter, which you speak to any sicklers, one of the worst things is the winter for us. So you can imagine the situation I placed myself in. While I was in boot camp, I eventually got pneumonia. And upon me having pneumonia, that kicked off a sickle cell crisis. Of course, when they finally found out I had sickle cell anemia, to the doctors, I was like a star on base, because many of them had never seen a sickle cell patient. They had no way of coming across a sickle cell patient in their line of work. So it was very kind of a interesting situation. When I initially first got sick, and they took me to a small, like medical stand on base, and I tried to tell one of the people that I had sickle cell, his attitude or his reaction was, "What's sickle cell?" which scared the hell out of me, because all of a sudden it dawned on me that they had no idea what this disease was. And I laid around in this place for hours trying to explain what was wrong. And finally, a doctor came through, and somebody said to him, "Look, there's some guy over there that says he has sickle something or another." And he came over, and he found that I had sickle cell anemia. He immediately got an ambulance to ship me over to the main base in the main hospital. And once I was in the care, it was fantastic. But as a result of that, I got a medical discharge and left the Navy. So it was a very short career. My parents, my father always had this attitude of letting me pretty much do the kind of things that I felt I had to do. And his attitude was that you're going to get sick, and you have to decide whether or not it's worth getting sick. If it is, then you go ahead and try it. If not, you don't do it. My mother, on the other hand, of course, was much more protective, like most mothers. And it really wasn't until my teens that I was able to start exerting my own and becoming freer. So though she was scared as hell, I think my father helped balance it for her, and eventually she was able to accept it as well as crazy adventure that, for some reason I had to go and do. But both of my parents through my whole life, and especially as a child, had very unique ways of dealing with me and dealing with the illness. My background, I always say, was a kind of a mixed background. My mother was from a proud West Indian family who were believed in hard work and in education and all of the upwardly mobile kind of ideas that many West Indians had when they first came to this country, especially in the 20s or before. My father's family, on the other hand, came from Charleston, South Carolina, and he came to the city very early in his life and had a whole different perspective of life. He had been through street experiences, so we had this, what he used to call horse sense, or homegrown sense, and this street knowledge that was totally different. And in many ways, they were exact opposites. During the period when they were courting, my mother tried taking him to an opera or taking him to a concert and he'd fall asleep, or she introduced him to jazz or took her to the Apollo for the first time. So I had this double kind of thing happening. And growing up, my mother's thing was to instill this feeling that, all right, you have a physical or medical problem, but that these things can be off-balanced by other things, and that when you're well, she expected me to do everything and to go to school and do my schoolwork and have my responsibilities. When I was ill, that was another matter. And she was always finding ways, or creative ways, of helping me deal with the many hours that I had to spend in bed many times as a child. And I guess it's through her I really developed an enjoyment of literature, an enjoyment of music. When I was well, we went to art galleries, to museums, to all these other things that I was exposed to. And this was her way of handling it. So with my father, his idea was you don't dwell on sickness, you don't dwell on your weaknesses, but instead you try to find your strengths and you try to develop those strengths. And he said, just always say it doesn't take a whole lot of muscles to lift a book or turn a page or try to learn things. And what's interesting is because his education was so limited, he put a lot of stock in education, but also in, again, that homegrown wisdom. He was a wise man in how he dealt with life. He used to always say to me that life was like a card game, and you walk up to the table and you're dealt cards, and there's 6 other people at the table. Everybody else is dealt a hand. The minute you pick up your hand, you're committed to this game. Now, everybody can have fantastic cards, and you don't. Or everybody can have terrible cards, and you do. It's fate. And in many ways, the stuff that he was saying without knowing the terms, he was really talking about karma, or he was really talking about the road or the way of life that you have to travel. And just to say, when you pick up those cards, you can do one or two things. You can play the hand you're dealt, or you can fold. And his thing was that it was always more exciting to play the hand you were dealt, and that you always had the option of folding. That was always there. So, though I think both my mother and father, the thought, let's say, of suicide, for instance, would be repugnant to both of them. My mother for spiritual reasons, being Episcopalian, and my father for others. But they both yet could understand and that if one chose to do that. So this was that wisdom that I think that he had. He could see these things. And he often would say that when I went in the hospital, he'd say it's like doing a bid. It's like going to prison. He says, some guys do their time well, some guys do their time badly. A guy that does his time well is somebody that can take his time and grow during that period. The guy that does it badly is a guy who doesn't grow and who, minute by minute, time ticks away and each minute leaves a scar on his ass. And that was real, and that was time, that was bad. And his was, how do you use that time that you're sick, or that time that you can't be physically active in something. So I got different strengths from both of them, and I think they tried to pass that down to all of the children. My brother, as I said, Gregory, died when he was 5, but when I think about it now, I think back then he was the wisest 5-year-old I think I've ever met or ever known, because already at that early age he had to face pain and hospitalizations and face death. And though no one ever came out and told either one of us, you could die from this disease, we both knew it and discussed it among ourselves, so that when he died, for me, it was the most profound loss that I think I felt so far in life. But at the same time, I discovered the world because of it. And it was always a feeling growing up that I was living for the both of us. And so I was able to undertake things that I probably normally would not have if he had lived. I would probably be a different person if he had continued to live. My sister, I think because she was a girl, that my mother tended to protect her even more. And it's kind of sad for me that when she died, she was just really breaking out. I mean, really blossoming and discovering so many things, and discovering who she was as a person, as a woman. And it was beautiful to watch her go through that. She was 19, so young, but in so many ways so old already. And the other two, though they don't have the disease, having grown up, having to deal with it, losing a sister and watching me time after time after time, that they've been able to develop a certain wisdom or a certain knowledge of life. And one year, 1977, in the course of 1 year, we lost my father, my sister, and my grandfather within a very short range. And they were children, and both of them had to grow up very, very quickly to deal with these things. And I think it accounts for their maturity. But again, I think for all of us, my mother has been the rock. And even for my father, when my brother died, my father really could not deal with it. I think that was the one thing in his life that he never, ever totally resolved. He always used to say that when he was a child, the only people he saw die were old people. In his world, children just did not die. So it had this unbelievable impact, or unbelievable effect on him, that he truly cursed God. God had taken his child. And where on the other hand, my mother realized that she had to hold the family together. And it was at that point, I think, the impact of the disease and all of its ramifications hit home for my father. And the worst of all being that he had lost a child, and that he very possibly could lose the other child. And, excuse me, at that time they told my parents I probably wouldn't live to be a teenager. And after that, they were told I wouldn't live to be 21, or I wouldn't live to be 25. And, I'm 39 years old now. But it's interesting because that did affect me. That whole concept that I would not be able to live to be an adult or have a full productive life affected me in that I felt I had to try everything. I felt I wouldn't have time enough to master any one thing. For instance, the idea of going to college to become a doctor or a teacher or whatever, of investing that much time or that block of time in my life didn't ring home for me, because I felt I would never have the time to do that. So I began to do everything and try everything. So on the one hand, it may have been a loss, but on the other hand, it was definitely a gain, because again, I did things that I normally would not have done, and tried my hand at different things and learned different things, and was always open to different experiences. And I think that's something that stayed with me. In New York City, I belong to a group called SCOSH, Sickle Cell Organization for Self-Help. And we work out of Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York. And the unique thing about our group is that it's made up totally of sickle cell patients. It was the first group anywhere to be organized by adult sicklers. And we hold everything from seminars and workshops with doctors and nurses, workshops and seminars with medical students, and we work with parents of children with sickle cell disease. And we counsel parents, and we try to develop our relationships with children who have the illness. And I think for myself, one of the things I constantly try to bring home to the parents is that whenever we see a sickler, an older sickler, who's going through all kinds of changes, that many times you trace it back and you see that it was because they didn't have the love and the foundation, the support, that you now have these problems, and how important it is that a child has this, how important it is that a child understands his or her self-worth. But at the same time, that you can't also smother that child, and you have to give a certain amount of freedom. And there's going to be bumps and there's going to be pain, but that comes with the territory. That's real, and the child has to be able to find his own feet. So it has to be a good combination of a few things. I believe that at the time that my brother died, if there had been counseling like that, maybe from my parents, that it would have been good, and I think it would have been good for my father. I think maybe it would have got him and my mother talking about things that went unsaid, that shouldn't have went unsaid. And I think they both kind of went into their own world with their own pain. And when that happens, then you're beyond consolability. No one can console you. So I think that any kind of counseling program for parents with sickle cell children is good, that parents should definitely, whether they think they need the help or not, check it out, because it's something they can learn from it. It's really just recently that more and more people are now beginning to understand all the complications and understand that 1 in 4 ratio of when you have children. I think that for many people, they had no knowledge whatsoever. When my brother and I were born, my parents knew nothing whatsoever about the disease or about the possibility that each and every child they had would have sickle cell. My parents were told that there was no way possible each child would have it, that the ratio was 1 child in 4. And of course I was incorrect. The ratio is 1 in 4 that each child would have the disease.
1 pregnancy in 4.
That's right, 1 pregnancy in 4 could end up with the disease. And out of 5 children, 3 of us had the disease. So it was a case of lack of knowledge that prevailed, and in many places still prevails.
So is there anything that you know of where people who, before marriage or before having children, people with sickle cell trait are counseled at all?
Yes, there's some places like that, right? Especially in hospitals that have a sickle cell program, when they come across an expected mother who has sickle cell trait, they'll try talking to them. But of course, the idea is to get to them before that. And there's only a few programs like that. For something like that to happen, that person usually has to have some knowledge that they are carriers. I believe that this testing program, testing school children for this sickle cell anemia, is a smart move, that these children should be tested and that they should be given this information. They should know that they are carriers of this disease, so that down the road they can make the proper kind of decisions. It's hard to always be slamming the door after the horse is gone, you know. I've learned not to make plans, simply because sometimes I don't know from day to day. Indeed, sometimes from hour to hour, won't know how I'll be feeling or exactly what could be happening. So we've had to learn to develop different styles of dealing with things. I'm married. I have a 14-year-old stepdaughter, and both my wife and my daughter deal with it fantastically. I'm very, very fortunate. They both understand that we can plan something one day and it can be turned around the next. But I think the thing that's important, the thing that gets you through that, is having an openness, a clarity and an understanding about the situation. If something is happening and Aichi and I plan to go, and all of a sudden I get sick a couple of hours before, we have to be able to have an openness with each other. If I say to Aichi, it's okay, sweetheart, if you want to go, you can go. She has to know that I truly mean that, and that if she goes, when she comes back, I'm not going to say, oh, you left me, all right? She also, when she says to me, if you want me to stay, I'll stay, I have to know that she would do that. And as long as we know that, and as long as that understanding and clarity is there, then we can deal. And I can say to her, go ahead, it's cool, and she knows she can do it, and I have to feel guilty about it later. Or that if I ask her to stay, she knows I'm asking her to stay because I need at that moment more than anything else for her to stay. But it's not based on some jealousy or because she's going to be there and I'm not going to be there, but it's because I physically, need her there, or I'm on my way to the hospital or whatever. So we both understand this, and we don't, and she doesn't, and I'm fortunate about this, look at it as a sacrifice. If it's taken in that spirit also, then there's a problem. Because with me, this is what it is. This is my life, and anybody who I would be with would have to be able to deal with that, and not everybody can. I've had past relationships, and definitely the illness can affect things, has and can affect things, and it's something I've seen with friends also. It's interesting and kind of sad. One of the things that I've noticed is that women with the disease have a harder time finding a man to deal with it than a man does in having a woman deal with it. And I think because of the kind of position society tends to put women in, that a woman can marry a man who has an illness and be the home keeper or the nurse or the mother, or all these different things. But that a man, it's very rare to find a man who can have a sick wife and deal with it and play these different roles. And I think it's a hell of a statement about our society and about men in our society. And again, I'm fortunate I have a fantastic daughter who, in the time she was quite little, grasped the situation and has been able to deal with it. And in all these years, it's never been a thing, well, Aki missed this or Aki missed that. But instead, she really feels when I miss something, not merely for herself, but for me, because she knows what it also means to me, that I would want to be there. Or when she did her first, she takes Japanese classical dancing, when she did her first recital, where she really did, for the first time, dances of older women. It was a fantastic event. I could not be there, but she told me about it in detail when she got back. So it's having to have that relationship. In fact, I think both Aichi and Akemi and my mother, my sister, my brother, my closest friends have all over the years been my eyes and ears for me. That they've seen and heard things that I couldn't because I couldn't be there, and they bring it back. And I've been very good at learning from other people, or being able to capture that experience that they had. And I've had to learn to do that. But nonetheless, sure, there are times when I wish I was more mobile, that I could do this with her or take her out more. And times where just she and I can do some things together, and I try to when I can, and I find myself doing with her now the things my parents did with me. Our place is the place where they hang out, but no, it's great. Yeah, I think so. I think Kimmy's close friends, right, all know something about the illness because she talks to them. She tells them, and she's very up on it. I mean, you can talk with her about how she sees things, and she deals with a lot of the stuff. And I think as she's gotten older, she's even become more of a support for her mother. And I think that especially when crises, when things are really bad crises, where I'm in for a long time, and she knows she has all these things to deal with. And as she's gotten older, she's takes on more responsibilities and understands more stuff, which is good to see. And again, her closer friends, in which know what's happening. She has a beautiful group of friends around her who live in the building or go to her school. And especially the kids in the building. I mean, we've watched them all grow up also, close to their parents. And then since my brother Malik is over there, and Zulu, my nephew, they all kind of converge in that spot. So a lot of the kids are there. But they all have their friends, and they go out, and they run, and they do other things. But I think because of the situation with me, they probably have a tendency to talk more about it maybe than other kids will with their parents. So I discuss a lot of stuff, what's happening. When I was younger, once I had a crisis, I was sick for a certain period of time. When the crisis was over, I was fine again until the next crisis. As I've gotten older, there have been other kinds of complications. In 1971, 1972, I had 2 total hip replacements done. 1975, a total right shoulder replacement. 75, I had a retinary attachment on my right eye. These are all complications that have come along. And with all the bone complications now, even in between crises, I'm usually in some kind of pain. There's usually something going on. So physically, there has become more complications. One of the differences, though, of being an adult sickler and being a child, of course, is that I'm aware of a lot more. I understand a lot more, and can express a lot more. It's interesting because as a child, and since I've had this disease my whole life, I've gone from being a child to a teenager to a young adult, to now where I'm actually older than most of my doctors and older than a lot of the nurses. And that's totally new, that's totally different. And I mean, I was able to watch that gradual change from being very young to becoming on par with them until now there's a whole bunch of people that I'm either older or the same age.
Do you find yourself educating them?
A lot of times. But I think it's always a give and take kind of a thing. I think the best doctors I've met are the doctors who allow themselves to be educated, the doctors who have come in and who realize that there's something there to learn, and they learn it. And to me, those have become the best doctors. I mean, you always run across those who think they know it all, and you can't tell them anything. And here you've been dealing with something all your life, but they tell you it can't be that way because they have a book somewhere that says it's not that way, So I mean, you do have those things to deal with, right? To understand that sickle cell is an abnormality of the red corpuscles. Our red blood cells is missing an ingredient that creates hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the substance that helps carry oxygen through the bloodstream. Hemoglobin is the material that also makes blood red. We have a lack of hemoglobin. Therefore, our cells can't get oxygen down to certain parts of the body. During crises, our cells, which normally are round shaped like yours, begin to break down and they get this sickle shape. That's how you get the name sickle cell anemia. And when they're in this shape, they clog up blood vessels. Blood can't get through, oxygen can't get through, and oxygen-starved tissues and bones begin to hurt, and that's what causes the pain. And if those spots stay starved long enough, they begin to deteriorate and break down. And for us, the joints of our bones are the spots that deteriorate the fastest. And what normally might take 70, 80 years on a normal person happens to us by our early 20s. So operations that were usually done on older people with bad cases of arthritis or older people who have fallen down and were not able to heal the bone, these are the same operations that they are now performing on sickle cell patients. So the lack of oxygen can cause irreparable damage from tissue and organ destruction all the way to bone destruction. But it's the nature of the illness itself that breaks off the oxygen, and the body, of course, survives from oxygen. But no, I think too many of the young doctors, they may tend to see, we have this 39-year-old sickler that's been through A, B, C, D, and he runs down, and their mind is boggling. My God, how did he go through all of this stuff? To the doctors I know over the years, it's glee. They're very happy, and it's sometimes a mixture of things that people see. And of course, there's always those who are not impressed at all. So, but I think that what we have to understand is that as treatments become better, as antibiotics become better, as surgeries become safer and more general, that we will be able to expand the life of sickle cell patients. The idea is, in doing that, can we also work to keep down the other contradictions or the other problems that can arise? Because on the one hand, you have a patient living longer, but on the other hand, the more complications he then has to encounter. So there has to be this attempt to try to balance it. I think that's one of the things that's caused this big argument in terms of research. There are many people who feel that all research should be used for finding a cure. There are others who believe that all the research should be for finding a treatment. And I personally think that it has to be a two-pronged approach. It has to be both. That you need treatment in order to treat all the people who are suffering from the disease right now, but at the same time constantly working towards a cure for those especially who are young, the children who now have the disease. The oldest sickler I know is about 46 and is a grandmother. She's always gets a crack about that every time I mention that she's a grandmother. And, her name is Mary Dean. She's the president of our sickle cell group at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. But I understand that there are sicklers who are older, though I myself have never met them.
Okay, what in this group, I'm sure that you've seen people go through a lot of different, complications. And you may have even seen some people that have passed away. Could you talk a little bit about the support group and, how, you've hooked up a group for when you're in the hospital, but it, also what happens outside of that situation in the hospital? Or is there any?
Right, it is. Well, that's one of the main things, a support group, and to help people both when they're in the hospital and when they're outside the hospital. And and our reasoning being is that other people may deal with the disease, but we all definitely understand, what it is you're going through, both physically and emotionally. We know what the pain is. We know at this stage how painful the treatments are. A lot of people have no awareness. They hear you're in the hospital, they hear you're sick, but they have no idea of the day-by-day pain that you go through, just in terms of trying to get well. We understand those things, and can deal with each other on a different level. There's a lot of things we don't have to go around. We can go right to in dealing with each other and talking to each other. If somebody's going through changes, it's hard to conceal it from the rest of the people in the group. I mean, they may do a good job with the doctors or the nurses or other people, but we will know, and we're able to bring each other account for that, and that's good. We've seen each other go through some terrible crises, and yes, we've had 3 people die since our group has been together, so we've watched death also. And though it's not a common thing that's discussed, we all are constantly aware At any time, any one of us can go. Yeah. But the main, I think, goal of the group is, one, to support each other, and two, to educate as many people as we can. I think those are the two main things. When I was younger, definitely, I did quite a bit to conceal it. A lot of times that I was in pain. There would be times I would be in so much pain I couldn't walk out of the house. And my father would be taking me to the hospital and would carry me piggyback on his back. And we would come out of the building laughing and joking until we turned the corner. I'd almost collapse in pain. And all of it was a show so that nobody would know that I was in pain. And he understood that and played to that, or helped me deal with that. Then people would see him returning later by himself. And he would tell them I just took him to the hospital, and they couldn't imagine, or would never have imagined that's where I was going. As time went on, I found that there was very few people who I allowed myself to be free enough to let them know how much pain I was in, or that if I was in pain. And over years, that was pretty much my pattern. At this point now, I still tend sometimes to be private concerning my illness, or concerning the pain. That's something we've talked about in the sickle cell group also. There are some people who, even today, have a hard time talking about the disease, because when they grew up, they saw it always so negatively. I think I've tried to break through that barrier. I no longer feel that I have to prove anything to anybody, but I do have a certain amount of privacy, about it. So if I'm among strangers or something, I probably would not, let them know completely how badly I am. I think I was a lot luckier than a lot of people, because I had, as I said, a strong family, and I had some strong friendships that go all the way back to my childhood. And in those ways, I was lucky. But I went through a lot of the same problems that other kids go through, the problems of fitting in, the problem of wanting to be part of the group. And of course, I was not like the group, And I think I went through problems, and the whole thing of trying to conceal that I was sick, except for people who were close to me. But in general, I think I was pretty lucky. I mean, there are a few experiences during there where you got into some things, and it maybe didn't work out the way you wanted to, but I think that happens for everybody. I don't think it was any worse in my case. I do believe, though, it is harder for a girl than it is for a guy. I think that guys accept another guy at a different level than women accept other women. If I had to pick a period of my life of when true friendships were made, they were made at the age of 19 and 18, 19, and 20, when I became actively involved in the struggle that was going on in black communities all across the country. And I think there was a new breed of black men and women who were emerging at that time, who had some political and cultural and social insights and were about making some changes. And I think it's at that stage that I definitely made friendships that have lasted. And whereas a lot of friends that I knew as a teenager, I'm no longer friends with. And I think that the common belief or ideology that I had with brothers and sisters in the struggle was so strong that it was able to surmount all kinds of other problems. I think for me, when I talk about this new black men, black women emerging, it was my generation. I was part of it. I was there. I was very fortunate when I was a child. I met Malcolm X when I was 10. My father had become friends with him and a member of the Nation of Islam. And when I was 11, he gave me the name Alkamal. So I was very early exposed to the teachings of Malcolm, the teachings of Marcus Garvey. So that by the time I was 19, and as I say, things were happening, I began to move with like people who thought the same way, and we've maintained our brotherhood. That's what it is, our brotherhood, over all these many years. But it was because it was about something.